I was sitting on the porch with my tea still warm in my hands when Alice leaned in close and whispered what would change everything. Grandma, Mummy, and Daddy said you don't need your pension money anymore. Just like that, the air shifted. I blinked once, maybe twice, and looked at her sweet face, her little pink hoodie with a stain of peanut butter on the sleeve. She went back to colouring, like what she said didn't just crack something open in my chest. The birds were still chirping, the tide was still brushing the shore behind the fence, but nothing was the same. I got up slowly, walked into the house, and reached for my wallet. Slid open the zipper compartment where I always kept my bank card. Empty. I checked my bedside drawer, the ceramic dish in the kitchen, the little tin I used to keep stashed behind the cookbooks. Gone. I walked back out to the porch, sat down beside Alice, and forced my voice to stay level. Tell Grandma what Daddy said again. He said you're old now, so you don't have to worry about money or passwords or bills. He said he's handling it. Handling it. That evening, Derek showed up in his truck like everything was normal. He walked through the back gate, kissed Alice on the head, and gave me a big smile. There was a time when I would have believed it. Not anymore. Hey, Ma. I stopped by to check on the water heater. Did it finally quit? I didn't answer right away. I was looking at him, but I was also seeing Derek at 12 years old, crying over a math test. Derek at 23, shaking hands at his first job interview, wearing a shirt I ironed. Derek at 30, calling me after his first mortgage approval, voice tight with pride. He was always the boy I fought for. Now he stood in front of me, taking what little I had left like it was his by default. I asked about the bank card. Oh, that. Yeah, I moved things around a bit. It's just safer if I consolidate everything under one access point. I've been dealing with your bills anyway. You've got enough on your plate. I didn't respond. He took my silence as agreement. Trust me, Ma. It's just easier this way. He started walking toward the utility room, talking about pressure valves and rust. I watched him disappear inside and exhaled slowly. I wasn't just scared. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. This man, my son, had taken my money. He had taken my name off my own account, turned me into a liability in my own home. And now he had my granddaughter thinking I was someone to be taken care of, pushed to the side, rendered invisible. I didn't sleep that night. I waited until the house was quiet, then pulled out the envelope from behind the bookshelf. My husband's old savings bonds, the ones we never touched. I opened a different drawer, found the journal I kept since he passed, and began writing. Names, places, dates, transactions I remembered, conversations that felt off. The time Shauna, my daughter-in-law, asked for my PIN to help reset something online and never gave it back. The moment I noticed the phone bill in her name, the water bill too. By morning, I had filled 5 pages. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't miscommunication. This was coordinated. I drove to the local branch. Lynn, the teller who had known me for 15 years, pulled me into her office when I told her what was going on. She didn't need to say much. The look on her face told me she had seen it before. Your account is now under restricted access, she said. You're listed as cognitively impaired and under managed guardianship. Derek is the authorized user. I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded once, calmly, and asked to see the paperwork. She printed it. I took a photo. Then I took another. One for the police, one for myself. By the time I left the bank, I knew what I was going to do. He thought I was soft. He thought I was tired. He thought I would sit there like a broken lamp in the corner and wait until he handed me my own life in pieces. But he forgot who raised him. I raised a boy who could lie to his mother. And now, I would show him exactly what that woman could do. If you're still with me, don't blink. This isn't a quiet story. This is where it starts. The next morning, I walked straight into the bank, eyes forward, back straight. I didn't wait in line. I didn't look around. I asked to speak to the branch manager. His name was Douglas, mid-30s, buttoned up but nervous. I told him I needed access to my pension account immediately. He typed, clicked, squinted at the screen. Then he sat back and said the words that confirmed everything. Your son Derek is listed as the legal custodian on this account. You've been designated under managed care status. It means all activity requires his authorization. My hands didn't shake. Not then. Not yet. Douglas kept talking. He explained that the paperwork had come through 2 months ago. Forms had been signed. He showed me scanned copies. There it was. My name. Sort of. A shaky version of my signature. Too loose, too clumsy, like someone trying to imitate a hand they didn't respect. He moved on, said that withdrawals had been processed for home maintenance, for health support. I stopped listening. I knew damn well I hadn't authorized anything, and I hadn't asked anyone to act on my behalf. Douglas offered to print the documents. I took them. He offered to call Derek to clarify. I declined. I didn't want a confrontation. Not yet. I wanted facts, evidence, proof of the war I hadn't known I was in. Outside, the wind was sharp. I held onto the folder like it was a weapon. That evening, Derek called to say he'd be by later to check on the pipes. I told him I'd rather he didn't. He laughed, said I was being dramatic, said I probably forgot the heat pump inspection. Then he hung up. 15 minutes later, he let himself in with the spare key I'd forgotten he had. He walked around like he owned the place. Fridge door open. Boots on the carpet. Voice echoing off walls that still smelled like the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning. He handed me a paper. Just a simple consent form, Ma. For the insurance, it gives us the ability to manage things better. Just sign here, bottom left. I looked at the spot he pointed to. The text above it said, medical authorization. There was more fine print underneath, but he turned the page before I could finish reading. Don't worry about the rest. It's just legal jargon. He smiled again, that same casual grin that used to charm teachers and neighbors. Now it made my skin crawl. I asked him where my bank card was. He said Shauna had it. She keeps it with her things. It's easier that way. Then he said something that stopped me cold. We're thinking it's time to get a full evaluation, just to make sure everything's still clicking up there. No pressure. Just a checkup. It'll help down the line. You know, for long-term planning. That was it. No pretending anymore. No friendly tone. No pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen or heard what I'd heard. I told him I needed rest. He kissed Alice goodbye, waved over his shoulder like he hadn't just confirmed my worst fears, and left. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out the folder, read every page, marked each lie. Then I opened the drawer under the hallway table and pulled out the old notebook my husband used to track our mortgage and taxes. I started a new section, titled it Control, listed the date, the names, the accounts, the access points. My handwriting was slow at first, but steady. By the second page, it was sharp. The next day, I called my old friend Lynn at the bank again. She agreed to meet after hours. She looked at the paperwork. Her face changed. I remember when we helped you set this up after Frank passed. There were never any additional names. I never saw a guardianship request. I showed her the forged signature. She pursed her lips, nodded once, and said she'd look into when and how that change was made. We printed 3 months of bank statements. I highlighted each unfamiliar transaction, Large hardware purchases, online payments, one withdrawal at a casino in Portland, all tied to the same debit number. Then she asked if I wanted to lock the account. Not yet. I told her I needed it open, just a little longer. Let them keep walking into their own trap. That weekend, I watched as Shauna drove up in a new SUV. Derek helped her unload patio furniture. Alice ran up the walkway, holding a plush blanket I didn't recognize. Inside, I checked the hallway closet. The 2 emergency savings envelopes were gone. One used to hold a few hundred in cash. The other had stamps and spare keys. Gone. I went into the guest bedroom. The quilt my mother made. Missing. A few of my old rings. Gone. I checked the garage. His name was scribbled on half the boxes. My name had been crossed out. By the end of the day, I had 10 more entries in my notebook. 10 pieces of my life I hadn't given. 10 lines they crossed without asking. That night, I sat by the window and watched the porch light flicker. The wind had picked up again. I heard Shauna laugh from next door. Loud, confident, secure. She thought I wouldn't fight back. Derek thought I didn't have the strength. They believed they could take everything and leave me smiling like a fool at Thanksgiving dinner. They didn't know the woman who raised them had stopped being soft the second they made her feel invisible. I was done letting them steal my life in inches. It was time to burn the whole damn plan down. 3 days later, I found the document that confirmed everything. It was tucked beneath a stack of glossy flyers in the hallway cabinet, right behind an old envelope labeled medical forms. The paper was crisp, fresh. Too fresh. It didn't smell like age or time. It smelled like ink, like urgency. At the top, bold letters, residential care evaluation packet. The facility was listed 2 counties away, a for-profit elder care chain. The form was half filled. My name, date of birth, and health insurance number were already typed out. Someone had written mild cognitive impairment in neat, practiced handwriting. The signature line was blank. I knew that handwriting. Sharp angles, a little too tall. Shauna's. There was no mistake now, no benefit of the doubt. They were preparing to move me out of my house, out of their way, out of their lives. I set the paper down on the kitchen table and stared at the fruit bowl. Bananas just beginning to brown, an apple with a bruise. The bowl was a wedding gift. Frank used to toss his keys into it when he came home. I remember the way the coins would clink, the way the dog would bark from the hallway. Now it just held silence. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The air was heavy. The tide was high. I walked to the far end of the yard, to the little tool shed Frank had built with his own hands. I stood there a long time, remembering the sound of his hammer, the way he measured everything twice, the way he always said, "Don't let anybody make you small in your own house." That night, I waited until everyone had gone to bed. I pulled out the small camera Alice had left behind last summer. It still worked. I charged it, tested the audio. Then I slipped it into the corner of the kitchen, behind the bread box. It had a wide-angle lens, enough to catch every word spoken over coffee or convenience. Next, I taped a second recorder under the dining table. Derek always liked to talk while he ate. He got that from his father. Only difference was, Frank never lied with his mouth full. By sunrise, I had created a folder on my computer labeled Inheritance. I wasn't planning to die. I was planning to make sure if they ever tried to bury me, they'd have to face every last thing they thought I'd forget. Later that morning, Shauna came by with a man in khakis. He didn't introduce himself. He walked through my kitchen like it was his, took photos of the hallway, the bathroom, the handrails near the stairs. He asked Shauna about square footage. She said she'd have to check the old papers. I didn't say a word. After they left, I checked the trash, found a folded slip with a logo, Hawthorne Assisted Living. Their packet was being filled out with urgency. I called my doctor, explained the situation. He scheduled me for an appointment the next morning. I told him I wanted an assessment. I wanted it documented. I wanted him to sign something official. He said, of course, then added he had always found me sharper than most of his interns. When I arrived, he ran the tests: verbal recall, problem solving, orientation questions. I answered every one without hesitation. He gave me the summary: patient, fully alert, aware, functioning independently with no signs of cognitive decline. He signed the bottom. I asked for 3 copies. He gave me 5. I walked across the street to the notary office, had my signature authenticated on a statement of mental clarity. Then I dropped by the local law firm Frank and I had used when we bought the house. I asked to speak to Eleanor, the same clerk who had witnessed our mortgage closing. She remembered me right away. I told her I needed to protect what little I had. I needed something called a transfer on death deed. I didn't want Derek or Shauna to get the house. I wanted it to go where Frank would have wanted, somewhere it could breathe again. I named the town library as the beneficiary. She asked if I was sure. I said I was done being unsure. That night, Derek called. He said he'd booked me a tour of a nearby assisted facility, said it was time to think ahead. Said Shauna had already dropped off the forms to make it easy. I told him I'd think about it. He said, "Good. You're finally being reasonable." I hung up. I took the recorder from under the table, downloaded the clip. His voice, clear and casual. "She's finally wearing down. Once she's in, we can start moving on the house. Shouldn't be long now." I labeled the file. Motive. Then I printed a list. A timeline. 4 weeks. That's what I gave myself. 4 weeks to collect every detail. 4 weeks to catch them with their own words. 4 weeks to take my name back. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about memory. Mine. Theirs. And the one they thought I'd lose. I wasn't just preparing to fight. I was preparing to expose. To stand in the center of the room and strip them of the lie they had built like a noose around my neck. It wasn't going to be quiet. It wasn't going to be nice. And it damn sure wasn't going to be forgettable. 2 days after I filed the transfer on death deed, I sat across from Ruth Martinez in her office at the county sheriff's department. Ruth had known me for nearly 40 years. We raised our boys in the same neighborhood, stood next to each other during PTA meetings, funerals, even hurricanes. She was sheriff now, 3 terms in, and one of the only people left who still called me Ada Whitmore, with the kind of respect that came from watching someone survive a whole life. I told her what Derek and Shauna had been doing. I handed her the bank statements, the forged paperwork, the voice recordings, and the new medical evaluation. She didn't interrupt once, just read, listened, and made notes on a yellow pad like it was a case she had already filed in her head. When I finished, she nodded and said she'd open a formal inquiry into financial abuse and misrepresentation. She asked if I wanted to press charges immediately. I told her not yet. I wanted them to dig their own hole just a little deeper. She understood. When I left her office, I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight to the church to see Caleb, my late husband's oldest friend and the only man left in this town who still sent me Christmas cards with handwritten Bible verses. He greeted me in his study, offered tea, and sat down without asking why I had come. I handed him the statement I had written the night before. 3 pages. Every detail of what Derek and Shauna had done, how they used my trust to steal control, how they planned to lock me away and sell the house Frank built with his bare hands. I asked if he would read it aloud at the next community gathering. I told him I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted truth to be louder than their lies. Caleb looked me dead in the eye and said he would do it himself, right before the closing prayer. I left the original with him and made my way to the town library, the same building where I'd worked for 37 years, the same room where I had taught children how to read and teenagers how to write resumes. I asked to speak with Gloria, the head librarian. She took me into her office and asked if everything was all right. I told her I was changing my estate plans, that I had named the library as the beneficiary of my house, to be used as an annex for senior outreach and literacy programs. I wanted kids and the elderly in one place again. Books, conversation, safety. No locked doors. Gloria cried. I didn't. I had no more tears left to give. Later that afternoon, I drove back to the bank and asked Lynn to help me draft a new beneficiary list for my accounts. Everything Derek and Shauna thought they would inherit would now go to the community centre, the library, and the local food program for seniors. I split it evenly. No gaps, no explanations. I also had her add a special note to the files. Beneficiary changes, authorised solely by Ada Whitmore, confirmed mentally competent by medical and legal documentation. Lynn made the edits. Then she leaned across the desk and whispered that the bank had received a second guardianship form from Shauna the day before. Another attempt to freeze my account. They had rejected it, pending further verification. They hadn't called me. They had just stalled. Because they knew. That evening, I replaced the batteries in the hidden camera. Then I left it running in the kitchen again. I didn't delete the old footage. I archived it, saved it to a secure drive, labeled the folder Bait. The next morning, I invited Derek and Shauna for brunch. They arrived in coordinated sweaters, acting like they had just come from church. Shauna brought flowers. Derek asked if I needed help setting the table. I let them pretend. I let them play their little game. I served eggs, poured coffee, smiled. Then I excused myself for a moment and went into the other room. I gave them 12 minutes. When I returned, Shauna was in the pantry and Derek was typing something into his phone. My phone, the one I kept plugged in next to the coffee maker. I watched him finish what he was doing, then step away like nothing had happened. I didn't ask. I didn't flinch. I picked up the phone, slid it into my pocket, and offered more toast. Later that night, I checked the browser history. He had logged into my online banking, tried to reset the login. Security alert emails had already been sent. I printed everything, added it to the folder labeled Proof. I also watched the 12-minute clip from the camera. Shauna was searching through my pantry drawers. Derek was whispering into his phone. At one point, he said she's cracking. Just a few more weeks, and it's done. I took that audio, trimmed the silence, and saved it as a file. I named it Countdown. By the end of the week, I had scheduled one more meeting, this time with the community board, responsible for organising the annual Seawind Harbour Festival. The event was 2 weeks away. Derek and Shauna were co-sponsors this year. They had booked a speaking slot to talk about elder care and family stewardship. I asked to be added to the programme. Just 5 minutes, I said. They agreed. No one suspected a thing. And now neither did they. Everything was falling into place. Every word they said was being used to sharpen the blade. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. Let them stand on a stage and lie in public. Let them smile and preach and paint themselves in gold, because the moment I stepped up behind that microphone, I would burn it all down with the truth. The day before the festival, I stood in my kitchen, hands deep in flour, rolling out the same biscuit dough Frank used to love on cold mornings. Not because I had guests, not because I planned to eat. I needed something to do with my hands while I listened. The recorder on the top shelf had captured a full 32 minutes the day before. Derek had come by unannounced with a folder, smiling wide. Said it was some end-of-life paperwork he and Shauna were organizing for all the older folks in the family. Said it was just in case, and no big deal. He laid it on the counter like it was nothing. Inside were 3 documents. 1, a revised living will, naming him medical proxy. 2, a consent form authorizing transfer of property in the event of mental degradation. 3, a durable power of attorney that stripped me of everything with one clean signature. I hadn't touched the pen, but he had signed his parts already, dated, highlighted where I was supposed to place my initials. The audio picked up everything: his tone, his pacing, the way he described me to Shauna over the phone while I stepped outside to get the mail. Words like unpredictable, confused, vulnerable. He spoke like I wasn't even human, just a task to be managed, a wall to knock down so he could walk through. When I returned, I told him I would read them later. He acted disappointed, said he was hoping to take care of it before the festival, said it would mean a lot to show the bank things were already in order. I nodded like I understood, like I was too tired to argue, like they'd finally worn me down. After he left, I scanned the papers. All 3 were drawn up by a private legal assistant Derek had used before, someone who had once notarized a car sale for him with suspicious speed. The addresses were real, the signatures legal, the timing deliberate. I added them to the folder, labeled it Final Attempt. Then I took out the last card in my drawer. It was a copy of a grant proposal Frank and I had written years ago. We never sent it. Life got in the way. But it had our names on it, our hopes. It was about turning the east wing of the library into a shared space for seniors who still wanted to contribute. A place where no one was treated like dead weight just because their bones ached or their memory slipped now and then. I brought it with me to the town hall, handed it to Gloria, told her to include it in the opening exhibit at the festival booth. A tribute to what we believed in and what I was about to fight for. That night, I didn't sleep. I polished the locket Frank gave me when Derek was born. I cleaned the photo inside, pressed it shut, and wore it around my neck. Then I packed a manila envelope with every document I had collected, labeled each section, numbered each page, printed captions in large font so no one could say I was trying to confuse or dramatize. At the bottom of the stack, I placed my updated will. It said clearly, "Everything goes to the people who never tried to erase me." The morning of the festival, I dressed in navy and grey, conservative, neutral. I wore the church pin Caleb had given me last Christmas. I carried the envelope in a plain black tote. No theatrics, no ceremony. Derek and Shauna arrived 15 minutes before their segment. Shauna wore a pastel blazer and nude heels. Derek had on the watch I bought him when he graduated college. He waved to me across the field like we hadn't spoken yesterday, like he hadn't tried to take everything from me over biscuits and lies. The stage was simple, a wooden platform with 2 standing mics and a banner overhead that read, "Sea Wind Cares, Family, Community and Respect Across Generations." The irony nearly choked me. They took the stage together, spoke for 8 minutes, smiled, told stories, repeated words like stewardship and gratitude. Derek even quoted scripture. Shauna shared a story about caregiving and trust. The crowd clapped politely, a few nodded along. Then Caleb took the mic. He welcomed everyone again, thanked the sponsors, and asked for just 5 more minutes before the program ended. He introduced me. Ada Whitmore, retired librarian, widow, mother, longtime resident of Seawind. I stepped up. The wind had picked up slightly. My papers fluttered in my hand as I adjusted the mic. I didn't look at Derek. Not yet. I began with facts. Dates, withdrawals, the forged signatures, the fake medical claims, the attempt to transfer property. I held up copies. I read them aloud. The crowd grew quiet. Then I played the clip. Derek's voice from my own kitchen, saying she's cracking, just a few more weeks and it's done. It echoed across the speakers. Even the birds stopped for a second. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I told them the truth, that my own son and his wife had tried to erase me while I was still breathing, that they took not only my money but my dignity, that they thought being old meant being powerless. I ended by holding up the grant proposal Frank and I had written, told them the house Derek tried to steal would become the home for that dream, a place where no elder would be silenced again. Then I stepped down. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need it. Behind me, people gasped, some murmured. A few stepped back from Derek and Shauna as if they had just caught the stink of rot. They didn't follow me when I walked off the stage, but the silence behind me was louder than any cheer I had ever heard. The aftermath was swift. By the time I got back to my car, the video had already made its way onto 2 local Facebook groups. I hadn't posted it. Someone in the crowd must have recorded the speech, maybe one of the teenagers from the library, maybe Caleb's nephew. Didn't matter. The clip was everywhere. Seawind was a small town. People talked fast when they smelled blood. Derek and Shauna had painted themselves into a corner with their polished smiles and pastel lies. Now every neighbor, every parent at school pickup, every vendor at the farmer's market had seen them for what they really were. The next morning, I woke up to a letter slid under my front door. White envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sentence. "We never meant to hurt you." I didn't even flinch. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and checked the Seawind Festival's official website. The organizers had taken down the video of Derek and Shauna's elder care speech. Their names had been removed from the list of sponsors. No note, no announcement, just silence, a clean erasure. I spent the next hour printing out copies of the grant proposal, the transfer on death deed, and my updated will. I walked them down to the town clerk's office and asked to have everything certified, notarized, and filed. I wanted no loopholes, no confusion, no redemption arc. Back at the house, I gathered every item they had touched. Shauna's casserole dish, Derek's toolbox, the Christmas ornament Alice made last year, but Derek had written his name on in bold red marker. I packed it all into a cardboard box and taped it shut. I wrote one word on the front: return. By noon, the police knocked on my door. Ruth stood there in uniform, no smile, no small talk. She asked to come in. I led her to the dining table where everything was already spread out. The audio files, the bank statements, the forged signatures, the assisted living paperwork. All of it in chronological order, labeled and dated. She sat down, listened, read, nodded slowly as each piece added weight to the last. She told me that based on what I had provided, the department was opening a formal investigation into financial elder abuse, fraudulent misrepresentation, and attempted unlawful guardianship. She asked me if I felt safe. I said I did. She told me if anything changed, I was to call her directly. I handed her the USB with the audio. She slipped it into her coat pocket without a word. Then she stood up, gave me a long look, and said she was proud of me. That evening, I received an email from Derek. It was short. Just wanted to say I think you've made your point. I stared at it for a moment, then hit delete. I didn't even bother to block him. Let him keep watching. Let him see what it felt like to be powerless. The following day, I met with Gloria at the library to finalize the partnership. The paperwork was signed. The keys would transfer immediately upon my death. No room for contest, no space for arguments. We stood in the children's reading room where the paint was peeling slightly near the corners. She talked about expanding it into a multi-use space. ESL classes in the mornings, community support groups in the afternoons, game nights for seniors on Fridays. I nodded. She cried again. I stayed still. Back at home, I boxed up the rest of Derek's leftover tools in the garage, the rusted drill, the dented can of deck stain he never returned, the empty toolbox with my father's initials scratched out on the side. I taped the second box shut and placed it next to the first one. 2 boxes. 25 years of entitlement. That night, I slept through without waking once. The next morning, I received another letter, this one certified. Inside was a copy of a cease and desist, hand-delivered from a lawyer in Portland. Derek and Shauna were attempting to claim defamation and emotional distress. They demanded a formal retraction and public apology for my statements at the festival. I read it slowly, twice. Then I slid it into the fireplace and watched it curl into ash. Within the hour, Ruth called. Said the lawyer who drafted the guardianship paperwork had been questioned. Said she admitted to signing based on assurances from Derek that I was in cognitive decline. No medical verification, no independent assessment, no oversight. Just blind trust in a charming son who had promised to donate to her re-election campaign for the local board. She was being fined. The complaint had been filed. One thread had unraveled. Now the rest would follow. I walked to the mailbox and dropped in a letter addressed to Alice. A real letter. Handwritten. 3 pages. No blame. No bitterness. Just the truth. Not the kind her parents sold her. The kind she would someday read when she started asking her own questions. When I got back inside, the answering machine blinked. 3 missed calls. All from Derek. I didn't listen. I walked to the window, watched the wind carry leaves down the sidewalk. A neighbor walked by with her dog, gave me a nod. Another honked from across the street and gave me a thumbs up. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't afraid. I had been erased once. But I came back, written in ink. The following Monday, I walked into the town hall with a folder under my arm and my hair pulled back so tight it felt like armor. I wasn't there for discussion. I was there to draw lines in ink. The community board was holding its regular meeting. Most people came to talk about sidewalks or summer events, not me. I was there to schedule the hearing. Ruth had already briefed them. The investigation was moving forward. Charges were being considered. But I wasn't content to let it unfold in the background. I wanted a public record, a meeting, a moment, one where I could put my story on the books in front of the same people who used to pat Derek on the back during parades and call Shauna a saint for taking care of her aging mother-in-law. The clerk stamped the form. The date was set. Thursday evening, open session. When I stepped out into the parking lot, I saw Derek's truck parked across the street. He stood by the driver's side, arms folded. His posture had changed, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, no grin, no lazy wave. I got into my car and left without looking at him again. At home, I cleaned the house like I was preparing for war. Every room, every drawer, not to impress anyone, but because I needed everything in its place. Control, order, evidence. Then I printed out the photos, the signature comparison from the forged guardianship form, the account transfer authorization that had never been discussed, the blurry screenshot of Shauna inside my pantry during the 12-minute window, the call log from the day Derek tried to reset my online banking. I laid them out on the dining table, piece by piece. Like tiles in a mosaic, they never thought I'd put together. On Wednesday, Gloria stopped by with a batch of flyers for the new library annex project. She had already ordered a banner to be printed with Frank's name on it. She called it the Whitmore Room. We drank coffee in the sunroom. She didn't ask about Derek. I didn't bring it up. But before she left, she pressed her hand over mine and told me this town would remember what I did long after they forgot what he tried to. That night, I ironed the same navy blouse I had worn to Frank's funeral. Simple, clean. I wanted to look like the woman they had forgotten I was. Thursday came with a sky so grey it felt like stone. I arrived early, sat in the second row, and watched the board members trickle in. Caleb sat beside me. Ruth stood by the back wall, arms crossed, watching everything like a hawk. When Derek walked in, the air changed. He was alone. No Shauna, no Alice. He looked smaller than usual, not younger, just reduced, like a balloon with a slow leak. He took the seat across the aisle, 3 rows back. The meeting began like any other: public safety updates, budget adjustments, event planning. Then they opened the floor for public comment. I stood. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't read from notes. I began with the facts. I stated my name, my address, and the reason I was there. I outlined the sequence: the forged guardianship paperwork, the unauthorized withdrawals, the attempt to transfer my home, the misleading applications for assisted care. I mentioned the footage, the recordings, the letters, the lawyer's ethics violation. I laid it out like a map, every detail sharp, every date exact. Then I looked at the room and said the one sentence that split the tension like glass under boot. My son tried to bury me alive in my own house so he could inherit it while I was still breathing. Gasps, silence, a cough, a chair creaking in the back. I didn't flinch. I kept going. I described what it felt like to be erased slowly, not all at once, but piece by piece: voice, access, control. I told them how it happens, how easy it is, how the law bends too far toward those who smile and say they're just helping. I told them I had fought back, that I had built a wall of evidence brick by brick. And I wasn't done yet. I ended by placing a single sheet of paper on the table in front of the board. It was a request for a protective order, a formal motion to bar Derek and Shauna from accessing my financial records, my residence, or any of my personal property for a minimum of 2 years, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. No emotion, no theatrics, just ink on paper. The chair of the board took the document and said they would consider it in closed session. I nodded and returned to my seat. Derek didn't say a word, not during the meeting, not afterward. But as I passed him on my way out, he spoke without turning his head. "You think this is over?" I stopped, just long enough to breathe in the weight of it. Then I said the only thing that needed saying: "It already is." And I kept walking, right out the door, into the cold, into the light. By the time the board released their statement on Monday morning, it had already spread through town like a storm warning. The vote had passed unanimously. The protective order was in effect immediately. Derek and Shauna were legally barred from contacting me, stepping foot on my property, or accessing any of my accounts, both physical and digital. Violation would result in arrest without further notice. The official letter arrived by noon. I didn't frame it. I didn't need to. The silence spoke loud enough. That same day, Ruth called to inform me the district attorney's office had reviewed the case file and was moving forward with charges. 3 counts: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, attempted fraud through false legal documents, unauthorized access to private financial assets. Shauna had already retained an attorney. Derek hadn't responded yet. The cracks had turned into fractures. And now, everything was breaking wide open. I spent the rest of the day at the library annex. Gloria had invited me to help design the layout of the new space. She handed me a floor plan and a stack of markers. The first room we mapped out would be called the reading parlor, not just for books, for stories, conversations, a place for older folks to gather, talk, teach. We painted the vision onto paper, corner by corner. At one point, she asked if I had heard from Alice. I shook my head. Later that evening, I received an email from a parent in town. She attached a screenshot of a Facebook post from Shauna, a paragraph written in defensive, passive tones. It claimed I had misunderstood, exaggerated, taken things out of context. She said she had been trying to protect me. She used phrases like family dynamics and complex situations. She tagged no one. But everyone knew. What followed was worse. Photos of my living room, my pantry, my bedroom. Shauna had taken them over the last few months, probably without me knowing, probably with the same phone she used to smile for holiday pictures. Now they were being used to frame me. Pictures of disorganized drawers, unlabeled pill bottles, a half-written grocery list with missing dates. The implication was clear, that I was unstable, forgetful, not fit to be alone. She couldn't attack the evidence, so she tried to attack the person. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time. Then I opened the folder labeled Recovery. Inside was every receipt for the last 3 months, every prescription, every verified appointment, the medical statement from Dr. Levitt, the notarized declaration from the sheriff's office confirming I had filed every report without assistance. I sent a single email, no commentary, just attachments, to Ruth, to the DA's office, to the lawyer handling the civil review, and to Gloria, just in case. Then I called Caleb. I asked if I could speak at Sunday service. Not for long, not as a victim, just as a reminder. He agreed. Sunday morning came with cold air and bright sun. I wore black. Not for mourning, but for sharpness. The pews filled slowly, familiar faces. People I had known since Frank and I first moved to Seawind. They nodded when they saw me. Nobody looked away. After the sermon, Caleb stepped aside and motioned for me to approach. I took the pulpit and opened the folder one more time. I didn't speak of bitterness. I spoke of erosion. How people don't always steal from you with violence. Sometimes they smile while they do it. Sometimes they call it care. Sometimes they use words like guardianship and just trying to help. But behind those words are rooms emptied, accounts drained, voices silenced. I reminded them what had happened wasn't rare. That elder abuse, especially financial, often came from within the family, that the worst betrayals wear the face you once raised and fed and forgave. Then I held up one last photo, me, in front of the house Frank built, standing alone, still standing. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. On the way out, a woman from the third row took my hand and slipped something into it. It was a photo of her mother. She whispered, "Thank you for saying what I never could." That night, I walked through my house and turned on every light. Not out of fear, but because it was mine. Every bulb, every floorboard, every breath in the walls, mine. And there was no one left to take it from me. 3 days after the Sunday service, I received the notice I had been waiting for. A court date. March the 4th, County Courthouse, the State of Maine versus Derek Whitmore and Shauna Whitmore. Charges: financial exploitation, fraud through falsified legal documentation, and attempted abuse of power of attorney without consent. The official complaint stretched 13 pages. The language was clinical, cold. But between the lines, I could see the truth standing up straight for once. I read the notice in full, folded it, then placed it inside the leather-bound notebook Frank used to keep for tax records. It felt right that it went there. He would have wanted to see it handled properly, legally. No screaming, no slamming doors. Just justice, plain and final. Later that afternoon, Ruth stopped by the house. She didn't come in uniform, just jeans, boots, and the same old fleece jacket she wore when we used to volunteer at the town cleanup every April. She sat down in the kitchen and pulled out her own copy of the court documents. Said the DA was confident. Said the evidence I had handed over was airtight. Said Shauna had changed her story twice during questioning, and that Derek had gone silent entirely. They weren't coordinating anymore. That was the first crack. Then Ruth opened her notepad and slid it toward me. It was a list of items seized during the investigation. Included was a ledger, handwritten. Inside, she explained, were notes from Shauna detailing when to intercept my mail, which drawers held documents, and how to gradually introduce the idea of assisted care. Like I was a project, a process, a conversion waiting to happen. They even kept track of which neighbours had noticed their visits, rating them with stars for how likely they were to ask questions. I stared at the notepad for a long time. Then I asked for a copy. Ruth handed it to me without hesitation. I added it to the folder under the tab labelled Intent. The next morning I walked to the post office with a stack of letters in my purse. Certified, return receipt requested. They were addressed to every organisation that still had Derek or Shauna listed as emergency contacts for me. My dentist, my pharmacy, my utility company, the fire department, the local hospital. Each letter included a notarized revocation of consent and an updated contact list. Every piece of paper was a door slammed shut. I wasn't leaving room for anyone to sneak back in through a crack. The same day, I filed a restraining order extension through my lawyer. I wanted it updated to 5 years, not 2, and I wanted language that barred them from any proxy legal action on my behalf, under any circumstances, without in-person notarized approval. She filed it within the hour. By the end of the week, the town board released a public statement in the local paper. It thanked the residents for their patience, encouraged any others experiencing similar forms of coercion or abuse to come forward, and officially announced the creation of the Ada Whitmore Fund, a new grant initiative aimed at educating and legally protecting seniors from financial exploitation. I didn't ask them to name it after me, but I didn't stop them either. When I walked into the grocery store the next morning, 3 people nodded at me without a word. One cashier reached out and gently touched my wrist as she handed me the receipt. A silent message. I see you. I believe you. Outside, a woman I barely knew handed me a folded note from the passenger seat of her car. Inside were only 5 words. They tried that to my mother. The note had no name. It didn't need one. That evening, Gloria called and said the first set of plans for the annex had been approved. The permits were moving faster than expected. Donations had nearly tripled in 2 weeks. Apparently, vindication resonated deeper than anyone anticipated. Then, just before bedtime, the phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize. But I answered. The voice on the other end was quiet, almost unsure. It was Alice. She had found one of my letters. She said Shauna had thrown it in the trash, but she had pulled it out and read it after school. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. Then she asked if she could visit sometime. Not with them, just her. I said yes. After the call, I sat by the window in the living room and watched the wind move the porch flag. The night was still, crisp, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was waiting for the next blow to fall. It felt like the house was holding its shape again, like the walls had chosen me, like I had won something bigger than court filings or public opinion. I had taken back the most valuable thing Derek and Shauna had tried to erase. My voice. and I wasn't giving it up again. The courthouse was colder than I expected. March wind slipped through the revolving doors and curled around the marble floors like it had business of its own. I arrived 10 minutes early, not to be polite, but to make sure I sat where I could see everything. Center row, first seat. My folder was tucked beneath my coat, though I didn't need it anymore. Every paper had already done its job. Every signature, every receipt, every recorded word had travelled up the chain. What came next was just the final pin in the wall. Derek entered first. His suit was wrinkled at the sleeves. He hadn't shaved. There was a stain on his collar, something small and dark that could have been coffee or guilt. His lawyer trailed behind him, flipping through a briefcase like he was still hoping to find a loophole. Shauna came in 5 minutes later. She wore a beige blazer and too much concealer. Her expression was blank, but her body was tight, coiled like she knew whatever came next wasn't going to be gentle. The judge was a woman in her 60s, grey hair, steady voice, no tolerance for nonsense. Her reputation was as solid as bedrock in this county, and from the way she moved through the docket, I could tell she had no interest in dramatic performances. The state prosecutor laid everything out first. He didn't embellish. He didn't editorialize. He just read. The fraudulent guardianship document, the financial transactions, the unauthorized access to pension funds, the voice recordings, the false statements given to bank officials, the home entry logs, the timeline, the ledger. When he played the audio clip of Derek saying she's cracking, the courtroom stiffened. Not a sound, no throat clearing, no foot tapping, just silence, thick and sharp. Derek didn't flinch, but Shauna lowered her head, just for a moment. The defense attorney tried to pivot, said I had been confused, that misunderstandings had happened, that maybe the lines between help and control had gotten blurry. He used phrases like poor communication and breakdown of trust. The judge didn't blink once. Then she asked me if I wanted to make a statement. I stood. I didn't look at Derek or Shauna. I looked at the judge, and I spoke clearly. I told her I wasn't confused, that my memory was fine, that my instincts were sharper than they had been in years, because survival has a way of waking you up. I told her how it felt to be treated like a burden inside your own life, to be spoken about in the past tense while you were still breathing. I told her I had trusted the wrong people, that I had raised them, that I had loved them, and they had counted on me staying quiet. Then I handed her a single photo. It was the last one I had taken with Frank before he died. Us on the porch, cups of tea, a simple fall afternoon. But in the background, Derek was there, laughing, reaching for the dog, a picture of a family that looked, for one breath in time, like it would never break. I told her I brought the photo not for pity, but for contrast. Because behind every moment of betrayal, there's a moment that once held promise. And I wasn't standing here just for myself. I was standing for every woman who gave and gave until she had to fight for the right to be left alone. The judge didn't thank me. She just nodded once and looked back at the file. She read the ruling slowly. Derek was found guilty on 2 charges, attempted fraud and unlawful control of financial assets without consent. Shauna was found complicit in 1 count and formally reprimanded for her role in producing and submitting falsified legal documents. Their sentence wasn't prison. It was worse. They were stripped of all legal standing over me. They were barred from access to my accounts, my medical information, and any property held in my name. They were ordered to repay the full amount withdrawn, with penalties, and they were formally documented in the statewide registry for financial elder exploitation. It would follow them. Every job application, every background check, Every loan or rental they tried to secure for the next decade would flag what they did. The judge made it clear. This was not a slap on the wrist. This was a mark they earned. Afterward, Derek walked out without speaking. He passed by me without turning his head. His footsteps echoed louder than his voice ever had. Shauna paused near the doorway. She opened her mouth like she might say something, but no sound came. She just closed her lips and followed him down the hallway. I didn't follow. I didn't even stand. I just sat there, still, unmoved. Then I picked up my coat, slipped the folder back under my arm, and walked outside. The air was bright and sharp. I stepped down the courthouse steps one at a time. At the bottom, Caleb was waiting. He didn't say anything, just walked beside me toward the parking lot. When I reached my car, I looked back once. Not at the courthouse, not at the street, but at the open space ahead, because that was the direction I had finally earned. Not in anger, not in sorrow, but in power. And there was not a single step of it they could ever take back from me. It was a week after the verdict when Derek called. I didn't answer. The number showed up blocked, but I knew it was him. I could feel it through the phone. I let it ring. I let the machine pick it up. Then I sat in the quiet kitchen and listened to his voice come through the speaker. He didn't apologize. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He said he wanted to talk, just once, in person. No lawyers, no accusations, just the two of us. I didn't respond that day. I left the message there. Let it sit like something rotting on the counter. I walked by it 10 times, let the words ferment. But the next morning, I woke up before the sun, poured a cup of black coffee, and sat at the window. And I said yes. Not to forgive, but to finish. We agreed to meet at the church, neutral ground. Caleb unlocked the side room and left it to us. Derek showed up 10 minutes late, wearing the same jacket he wore when he packed his things to leave for college. It didn't fit anymore. Too tight across the shoulders. Or maybe it was just the weight of shame. He didn't shake my hand, didn't sit down right away. He stood at the edge of the table and stared at the wood like it could speak for him. When he finally sat, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not younger, not fragile, just deflated. He started by saying he hadn't expected it to go that far. He said they only meant to help. That Shauna had read something online about protecting aging parents from scams. That it made sense at first. He talked in circles. I let him. For 15 minutes, he moved around the truth like a man trying not to step into wet cement. Then he finally looked up and asked why I did it so publicly. I answered without blinking. Because they would have erased me privately. That shut him up. He sat back in the chair and stared at the cross hanging above the chalkboard. It had been there for as long as I remembered. Frank once told me that even a quiet cross has sharp edges. After a while, he cleared his throat and said he lost his job. That Shauna was considering moving back to her sister's in New Hampshire. That Alice was asking questions he didn't know how to answer. He didn't cry, but there was something cracked in his voice. Something that almost sounded like a man facing himself for the first time. I asked if he remembered the last time Frank spoke to him. He said he did. He said Frank told him to be the kind of man who left things better than he found them. Then he said he wasn't sure if he could do that anymore. I told him it wasn't too late to try, but it would never involve me again. I told him the door was shut. Legally, emotionally, permanently. He nodded, slowly, like he already knew but needed to hear it anyway. Then I said one more thing. I told him he didn't lose a house, he lost a mother, and that was the real cost. He sat there another minute. Then he stood, said thank you, and left. No handshake, no look back, just a quiet exit through a door he would never open again. When he was gone, I stayed in that room another 20 minutes. I breathed. The air felt clearer, not because everything had healed, but because it no longer had to. Some things don't get sewn back together. Some things are meant to stay broken so you remember where the cracks began. By the time I stepped outside, the sun was high, the wind had calmed. I drove home with the windows down, not to let anything in, but to let the rest of it out. Spring arrived slower that year. The trees outside the house bloomed in uneven bursts, like they weren't sure if it was safe to begin again. The yard needed raking. The porch paint had chipped in 2 new places. But I let it stay that way. Some things didn't need to be fixed. They just needed to be seen. On a warm Wednesday afternoon, I walked down to the library annex. The new sign had gone up the day before. Gold lettering on dark oak. The Whitmore Room. Below it, in smaller type, a space for dignity, knowledge, and connection. Inside, volunteers were unpacking folding chairs and boxes of large print books. Gloria was setting up a reading corner near the windows. She waved me over and handed me a stack of name tags for the upcoming community welcome event. I took them to the front table and placed them beside a basket of pens. Before I left, she gave me a small box. Inside was a brass plaque, engraved with my name and a quote underneath. Not from scripture, not from a famous author, just something I had said in passing during one of the planning meetings. You don't have to be loud to be heard. I carried it home like it was glass. That night, I placed it on the mantel, next to Frank's photo, next to the ceramic lighthouse Alice made in 2nd grade. It felt like something had found its rightful place. I still hadn't heard from Alice again, but I didn't need to. The call had been enough. Her voice, soft and clear. Her question, honest. Her desire to see me, free of instruction or adult interference. That was more than apology. That was hope. The house was quiet now, but not in the way it used to be. Not with tension hiding in corners, not with lies clinging to the walls, just stillness. On Sunday, I brought 2 pies to the community centre, 1 apple, 1 lemon. The church had organised a small gathering to honour the first round of community grants from the Elder Protection Fund. My name was mentioned once, briefly, by Caleb during the opening remarks. I stood in the back and nodded. Afterward, a woman named Patrice approached me. She had grey curls and eyes like she had seen everything twice. She told me her niece had just gone through something similar, that she hadn't known what to call it, that now she did. She squeezed my hand before leaving. No questions, no stories, just pressure, just truth. The next week, I walked the shoreline behind the property for the first time in months. The sand felt firmer than I remembered. The water was cold but steady. The bench Frank built out still stood, though one of the legs had sunk slightly into the dirt. I sat anyway. Let the wind come in full. Let the sound of the tide sweep past the weight of the past few months. I thought about what Derek had said in the church, about Frank's last words to him. Leave things better than you found them. Maybe that wasn't his legacy anymore, but it was still mine. I stayed on that bench until the light turned amber and the gulls quieted. Then I stood, brushed the sand from my coat, and turned back toward the house. My house. My name. My story. Still standing. Still mine. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or quietly erased inside your own family, this story was for you. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves in silence and lands like stone. If this resonated, let us know. Share your thoughts, your strength, or even your own story in the comments. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like Ada's, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. Healing begins when truth is spoken. Let's keep speaking it together.